This is lesson 2, where we will be doing the paint and ink distress on the wooden frame. In the first photo, I have just plain white acrylic paint on my craft sheet, and then in the second photo, I painted the entire frame. The inside where the glass will be next to the frame, the outside edges, everything, I completely painted it in and dried it with a heat gun. Then I sanded it down and removed the excess bits of paint that were chipping up with a damp towel and dried it again. And you'll want to watch the video to see what happens when you have that ointment on the frame before you paint it, so you can see how much ointment you might want to use. You'll also want to watch the video to see how the paint will bubble up when it's being heated, when it's over the ointment. So that can also give you an idea of how much you want to add. Now you're going to add a color to your frame. I actually had another step in here where I put wood stain on the frame, but it ended up pretty much getting completely covered. You can't really see it towards the end of the project, so it's a step that you can just completely skip. I added a turquoise or teal colored paint to the frame, which is something that you see on vintage frames quite a bit. So just paint again all of the sides, the inside, paint it completely, just one coat of the paint. Dry it with a heat gun, and then you're going to sand it down and wipe off the excess and dry that with a heat gun again. And there's also the video inside of the classroom for this step as well. Now we're going to whitewash. In photo number 1, you can see the approximate quantity of paint to water that I have in the little bowl. You want the paint to be watered down because you want to be able to see through it. And the way that you can get this very vintage looking frame is through layers. So we're going to be doing this whitewash a few times so that we can get that very layered, very aged look. So once you mix the paint with the water, you're going to paint it all over your frame, inside, outside, edges, everything. You're going to dry it with your heat gun. Then you're going to lightly sand it and wipe it off and dry it again. We're going to do that again a second time. Add another layer of the whitewash. You're going to dry that, sand it down, wipe that down, and then dry it one more time. Now we're going to stamp. You can use any stamp that you like. You can use a script, a text, numbers, a flower pattern, music notes, anything that you would like. You just need to use a fast drying ink for this. And I used my Midnight Mixed Media Inks chalks for this. So after you stamp your image on, like you see in photo number 2, you're going to dry it. Then you're going to sand the frame, wipe that down with a damp towel, and then dry that with a heat gun. You're going to do one more thin whitewash layer, and then you're going to dry it. We don't use the sandpaper at this time. We're going to use those chalks again. This time we're using driftwood and sparrow. You always want to start with your lighter colored chalks because it helps to keep your ink pads from getting contaminated. Normally I say don't use your ink pad directly onto a project, but for this it actually works really well when you use your ink pad directly on the frame. So in photo number 1, I used the lighter color, which is driftwood, on the edges, everywhere where there's an edge that comes out, on the corners, on the inside, on the back of the frame as well. And then in the second photo, I used the darker ink, which is sparrow, and did the same thing, but just not as much. And as you're putting the inks on, you can swipe a line across and then kind of blend it in a little bit. It stays wet for just a very short amount of time for you to be able to do that. And then in photo number 3, that's what the frame ended up looking like once I had finished putting all of the ink on. Now we're going to do one more sanding. We're going to lightly sand down the frame, wipe it with the damp cloth, and then dry it. We're moving on to the next lesson, which is the dry erase calendar portion.